Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santy, who did not want to record today, but I'm doing it anyway. And today with me is Lizz Nolasco.
Hello.
Who is a good sport all around, even though it was probably clear I was trying to back out of it when we were texting earlier. You weren't offering like, oh, well, we can do it another time.
You sounded like it was something you needed to get done.
I do. Actually, all morning I was kind of like, God, do I even want to do the podcast anymore? Is this even something I want to do? Which I know is ridiculous because I love doing this. So I always want to cancel and I always enjoy it once I'm in the middle of recording. So thank you. We're going to talk about a quote from the book. Let me get the title out here. The Great Disconnect in Early Childhood Education, What We Know versus What We Do by Michael Gramling, who has been on the show before. So if you want, you can search his name and it will bring up the episode he was in on the podcast, whatever podcast app you use, or on my website, wherever you can search his name and find it. That's very enthusiastic recommendation, I know. But here's the quote. I'll just give the quote and then Liz and I can start talking about it. But he says, I've heard this one before. If her kindergarten teacher is going to make her miserable next year, we better make her miserable now so that she can get used to it. Which, of course, is sort of an exaggerated way of saying the kinds of things that we hear along the same lines, but not necessarily talking about making children miserable. So I want to read
side effects,
yeah, I want to read it again because I felt like I really fumbled through it, but I've heard this one before. If her kindergarten teacher is going to make her miserable next year, we better make her miserable now so that she can get used to it. End quote. So I sent this and one other Gramling quote to you, and this is the one that you thought would be fun to talk about. So I'm going to let you go first.
I will. Okay. So the problem is, right before we started recording, we were on one path, and actually, what really interested me in this was a different path. So I'm hoping you're okay.
We can go all over. There aren't really any paths on the show, I've noticed sometimes.
I'm learning this, but maybe it's almost a new year. Maybe you'd really like to be very linear here.
I do one episode a year where we keep it very straight. No, go ahead. Whatever. What are you going to say?
See, I read this and you sent this at the end of November of 2021. And I'm in California and we're looking at a really huge expansion of early childhood into the elementary schools.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, do I have mixed feelings, right?
Oh, mine aren't even mixed.
In principle, early childhood education should be available to all. Early childhood educators should be educated and well trained.
Yes.
These are good things.
Yes.
In practice, we are putting our 4-year-olds in classrooms with teachers who have been teaching 11 and 12-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not just making this up. On my very own next door feed, someone was asking for flashcards for her 4-year-olds because she's used to teaching 6th grade, but she's really excited to move to TK.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And so this push down has gotten we've known about it forever, right?
Yeah.
But this squishing more children into the elementary school model, when we've already done it so poorly for our current kindergartners, first graders, and decades of kindergartners and first graders.
Yeah.
It's just daunting to see it again and so much more severely.
Yeah.
And the idea that now you need to, all these early childhood programs are preschool, right?
Yeah.
And the academics just keep getting pushed further down for the sake of quote unquote accountability.
Right.
Ignoring child development or anything that is actually part and parcel of childhood.
Yeah. And I know there are a lot of people who, on social media, especially when I say anything about how concerned I am about 3 and 4-year-olds being in the schools and universal pre-K and, when they talk about qualified teachers for that universal pre-K, if it's in the public school, to me, that means we're either going to have to invent a new early childhood licensure that a lot of states don't have, some might now, or they're going to have to just use the system they have for licensure for teaching elementary school. And this isn't even criticizing elementary school teachers. They don't get the training. They don't get the prep for 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, young 5-year-olds, in an elementary school degree. And I have heard that from many people, and that was my own experience. One of my degrees had to be in the elementary education program.
Yeah, going from early childhood associates to elementary bachelor's.
Yeah, for the bachelor's.
Master's
Yeah.
Real weird.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we've been trying this. I don't know that it's that much new than what I've seen in early childhood already. We're already trying to push academics down. We already have a lot of teachers who don't necessarily have the specific understanding of child development and what learning looks like and means happens in these early years. But now we're sort of formalizing it and putting a lot on the shoulders of 3 and 4-year-olds. They're going to save everything, but if we can just get them into the schools. And it just robs their childhood. It just robs them of their childhood to put them in schools. This wasn't intended to be a universal pre-K episode. So my mind is reeling now in different directions, and I'm going to pull it back to the quote. So when I saw it, where I was coming from was, as I told you before we started recording, I just finished teaching an emerging literacy class, and had Lisa Murphy join the class. And it's so funny how I tell the students, like, you don't even know how lucky you are that she's just joining us for free for this class. People pay a lot of money to go see Lisa, but they're new to the field, so they haven't quite learned that yet. What an honor they're getting with her talking. But anyway, I had invited her to talk about, because I had really focused all of semester on, we tend to focus on what we think elementary school learning looks like when we're trying to get kids ready to read or teach them to read. And we think if there are reading problems when kids are testing in 2nd grade, then if we just start that kind of education earlier, we'll have that will benefit them. And we had just read a chapter in the text that was very adult led. And so I invited Lisa to come in and talk about how all of those things in that text chapter could be done in play or seen in play, or we could support it by putting things out for play, like just in the general environment, not like provocations and invitations and all those things that we're fighting about now on social media. And one student said, but I have a 2nd grader who really struggles with these long spelling lists they give him. So I think we do need to teach in preschool these academic things, because, my son is really struggling with this spelling list they're giving him. And it's a hard place to be in when you're looking face to face at a mom who's concerned and say, well, that's because school is inappropriate sometimes, or well, maybe because he didn't get these foundational things that we've been talking about this whole class. Maybe that's why it's
development and how long invented spelling is actually appropriate.
And
then talk about your 2nd grader's spelling list.
Right. And it was like 50 words or something ridiculous like that on the 2nd grader's spelling list. So it just, it took me back, because I've read this book over and over, and it took me back to this quote, because it's such a, that makes sense when we say things that way. And the arguments people are using for universal pre-K, they make sense for people who have good intentions about wanting to help children have the best life they can. But it's folk wisdom. And to put it in these terms of, well, they're miserable, they're going to be miserable then, we better get them ready to be miserable now, just stopped me in my tracks the first time I read it. And I go back to it a lot when I'm having these conversations with people.
Right. I wonder how many elementary school conventions, I mean, if you really take apart the day in a typical preschool, right? Mm-hmm. How many of these are playing teacher, like I've heard you say?
Yeah.
And, how many of them are trying to prepare them for something that they shouldn't need to be prepared to do?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think lining up is one of those things, and that's just unnecessary, right? I mean,
yeah. A lot of our routine things, making them all sit together for a story, or doing everybody doing the same activity at the same time, led by the teacher, or lining up, or being quiet, right, or being still, are all things that's not even academic push down. That's just school I don't know, practices,
Right.
expectations pushed down.
I
And
guess that's where I went with the miserable, right? Some of those daily routines that don't need to be routines, that
yeah,
are just so distinct from any actual learning that is or could be happening.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for a lot of teachers that I've talked to, elementary school teachers that I've talked to who are on the school readiness side of things, when they talk to me about early childhood, what they're really concerned about is class management, right? They want students who are sort of easy to fit into that routine, and it's not even for them as much about the academics. But we have to say it's academics because it's nicer, I guess, maybe to say that than to say, well, we just want them to shut up, sit still, and listen. And I need you to do whatever you need to do at 3 so that they can do that when they're 5 in my classroom. But so much of it is maturation. If we just give them a chance to be children and to do the things developmentally that they need to do, then they will be more ready. And if they have to do those things when they get to school.
Right. Can I tell you, in all of my time actually telling people that, yes, the kindergarten teachers really want that, the ability to engage with the group, and never thought of that icky side of like, I just want them to shut up. Never crossed my mind.
And it might not even occur to the teacher who's saying that to you, but ultimately what they need is quiet, still students so that they can do their teaching. And that may be effective for that age. I'm not sure that it lines up with what we know about movement and brain development and actual learning, but I'm not convinced that school readiness is about school readiness. I think it's I think the school readiness panic is about that whatever assessment they have to do to see if they can get into kindergarten. I don't even think it goes beyond that, because a lot of teachers also will tell me if they can write something that's close to their name and participate in a group, I can teach them everything I need to teach them in that first year.
Yeah.
So it's messy. And we tend to, I think even I have been guilty of this, dehumanize the child in the conversation, because we're railing against the systems and we're railing against the people who don't have, what we think they need to have to teach young children, or whatever the curriculum companies that are making money off of this, and forget, okay, but there's miserable children in the mix of all that. And miserable children aren't going to learn the best. They're not going to be able to function at their best if they're feeling that kind of emotion or pain, or just feeling generally unaccepted.
Right. It's just this backwards push, right? We're trying to put the smaller children into the elementary schools for the sake of school readiness. And I'm sorry, I know you said you don't want this to be a UPK episode, but also
it can be. I also said we don't go in a straight path. Yeah, go ahead.
But I feel like there's so much more that the elementary schools could get from listening to early childhood.
Yeah.
But there's this idea of the professionalized elementary educators and the not.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta tell you, I'm struggling for a word ever since I saw Carol Garwood-Murray talk about how, the distinction for babysitters actually has a really terrible history.
Yeah.
I'm kind of stuck on the, but I think unprofessional, non-professional is still a reasonable distinction, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea of a professionalized and knowledgeable basis of early childhood knowledge just isn't respected, isn't thought of in nearly the same way.
No.
My in-laws, who are wonderful, delightful people who taught elementary school for 1,000 years, keep asking when I'm going to be a real teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to get that a lot. Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, part of that is, I think about Indiana in specific, where you can be a family child care provider, licensed or operating legally without a license. And the qualifications for people to operate in those ways are different. We've got registered ministries that I think still don't have any qualifications for staff, but look like childcare centers and often call themselves preschools. Childcare centers that, depending on what level of state quality rating scale they're at, or what level of accredited or not accredited, have different qualifications for what their staff need to have. And And then like the half-day preschools have none, according to Indiana law. If they're only like half days or a few days a week, there aren't any staff qualifications. I'll have to double check that now because it's been a few years since I looked at that, but that used to be true at least. So how can we expect a unified body of knowledge, and so many of us sort of jumped, because universal pre-K has been a topic of political conversation for years. It's not new to the Biden administration. And as soon as they started doing it, I feel like we were also grateful to be included in the conversation and to be recognized as something that could be important, that we jumped in unquestioningly. And now we've been sort of complicit in it for all these years, instead of at the beginning saying, okay, we'll accept your acknowledgement of us, but here's what you need to know about us. So
it just enforces that hierarchy of the preschool teacher versus the toddler teacher versus the teacher. And
yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about, because I don't know that I have an answer that has convinced anybody when I get that sort of response well, they're going to have to do this in 2 years, so we should start doing it now. It seems like we should just be able to say, well, developmentally, that's not true, because that's not how it works. And here's how it does work. And here's what they do need. But that's not enough, I think, to change minds and practices. So I can talk about all those things, but unless I get to have a conversation about that topic with that same person over a period of time, it's unlikely I'm going to change their mind just in that moment.
Yeah, one-liner that can really change the lens there is difficult.
Yeah.
to go from sorry, I have like a third of a thought going right now.
Yeah. Perfect. I'll wait. I mean, it's the same thing as when I was a center director and I would get a call and they would say, so are you just like a daycare, or do they learn things?
Right.
And first I have to get my own emotions in check, and then I can start to answer. But I haven't found a good way to do that, in that one conversation. And maybe that's not what I should be going for. But
I mean, I think you have to draw on people's experience, right? It's all well and good to know the theory of child development and practice what you do, but you need to draw on people's observations, right? You need to draw on the fact that, are you just a daycare? Are they learning? Well, tell me about when your child was learning to talk. Did you sit down with them?
Oh, yeah.
Go through that first 100 words book and make sure that they knew each one. And those were the words they knew.
Yeah.
To acquire language. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think it's the same as you age up, right? Are children going to be held to the expectation that the adults is constantly imparting the knowledge, or can we as a society and as individual parents and educators trust that children are capable of consolidating their knowledge and applying it in ways that interest them and are appropriate for them?
Yeah. I guess that's a really smart answer. And I've used walking as an analogy a lot. It's like, so I should just pick up this 6-month-old baby, hold them under the arms and then let go repeatedly until they are able to walk, because they're going to have to be able to walk to go to kindergarten. And everybody's, quick to say, no, that's ridiculous. That's not what we're talking about, but it is what we're talking about. It's holding them up, expecting them to do something that they don't have the full development for yet, that they need lots of other experiences to be able to build on to do those future things. But I do think that teacher ego is a big part of that. Someone working with an infant doesn't necessarily have that same self-expectation or feel the burden of somebody else's expectation to be showing learning. The preschool teacher has that expectation. The 3, 4, 5-year-old teacher, who am I kidding? The toddler teachers too, are facing some of that. Like, what do you do to teach them to read? And when do they do ABCs? And so I'm convinced that changing parents is the key, helping them to see what's appropriate and to look beyond what's marketed to them is more key than working on our colleagues, I think. Not that
there's
I'm going
certainly
to, what?
there's certainly more parents, and encouraging them to band together and lobby and encourage the schools to actually do what's appropriate for their children.
Yeah. Or
certainly
give them,
cool.
a different script when they're talking to teachers. They ask, do you teach things there? Are they going to learn their ABCs? Are they going to, what's your discipline policy? Are they going to be able to learn to be in school when they're with you? And that's all comes from a place of a parent who wants academic success for their child and has been sort of conditioned to think that's the biggest focus they should have when they're looking for care or any kind of early childhood education. So we can just sort of help them understand that doesn't have to be all, that there's lots of other things that you could be asking, and I think that's a change, because then also teachers can't say, well, this is what the parents want.
Yes, that's also true. Yeah, I mean, I think I think that comes back to the professionalization of the field.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is that professional confidence and competence.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to find a doctor who says, well, this is what the patient wants, so actually we're not going to go to could proceed with this radiology referral, because
Yeah.
really would rather not.
Yeah.
They think
the patient thinks she's done.
Right.
We don't want to do anything further. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think that there's so much. I mean, I think there is a need to standardize early childhood through elementary school. I think we need that developmental focus extended through grade school. I think that pitting the two groups against each other continues to be counterproductive, because, like you said earlier, the education is so different, the training is so different. The kids are not so different.
Mm-hmm.
4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old. Of course, there's maturing. Of course, there are different skills that are accomplished, but there is no reason for the teacher of a 6-year-old to know so much more, behaviorist classroom management practice and how to teach the test, as opposed to what a 6-year-old is like.
Yeah, I felt like when I was working on the bachelor's degree that was in elementary education, I felt like the focus was so much more on how to get them to do blank blank, or how to present information to children. And when I've done the early childhood classes, there's an element of that too, honestly, in some early childhood classes that I've been in, or the attitudes of some professors I've talked to. But it's more, you do get more of child development. You get some of that theory, you get broader age range. And it's not as much just here's how you can present information to a group.
Right.
Which is, I feel like that those teachers who don't get that are kind of ripped off. I mean, that would equip them to deal with some of the really stressful things of teaching.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's damaging to all sides.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the children who are being asked to accomplish things that are far beyond their developmental level, and the parents of those children who are made to feel like failures because their kids can't act like 8-year-olds when they're 5.
Yeah. It really makes me crazy. This whole, well, just what he said, getting them ready to be miserable by engaging in the practices that will make them miserable 2 years earlier and for 2 years longer.
Right. Yeah, I think it was interesting when I trying to be vague about time frame here.
Yeah.
At one point, I had some children who went up to kindergarten. I was talking to a parent at one, later on when the child was in kindergarten. I said, "Oh, how's so and so doing?" And "Oh, they're really having a hard time just sitting." I was like, I could have told you that. In fact, I may have told you that.
Yeah.
Because that's not good for them. That's not what they need to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Incredibly bright child who doesn't need to sit and quietly listen and, sit and do a math worksheet. Right? They're still learning. They're still doing all of these things that we want them to, and they personally need to.
Yeah.
Not because society says so or the school says so, but because that is what their brain needs, right? That's
Right. I was going to say all this, the new information that we get about how brains develop and what they need supports that children need movement. And even that we take and we sort of bastardize it into, well, if I want to get them to learn, I have to allow them a little bit of movement, but I even need to be in control of that. So we'll do
brain
action
break. Everybody
songs.
follow exactly what I do.
Yes. So the brain breaks are a good idea and can be done well, but too often it's used as a gimmick to get to the learning that they think is really the important learning. And that's the brain stuff. I mean, like the cognitive math, science, reading kinds of stuff that we get really caught up on when we're talking about what children need in the future to do well in school.
And to do well in society, right? If we look at the purpose of school, and oh my God, if I have this conversation one more time during COVID, we are not babysitters. School is not childcare. Anyway.
If that's also the purpose that parents got from you, then that's what you are.
Go figure. But if we look at, what school is designed to be versus what schools could be, right? They could be so much more holistic. They could serve the entire child. They could serve society instead of, what's the word, straightating? That is not right, but stratifying.
Sure, yes.
Dividing children by abilities from the earliest days and keeping them in there. And, we already know there's the preschool to prison pipeline. We know that children are damaged by the school system starting in early childhood.
Yep.
And just looking at the potential for schools and how they need to change to serve the greater good, as opposed to putting more bodies in there to continue serving this unnecessary end, right? The factory schooling. Yeah.
Just prompted some and I can't pick it. I can't pull it out of my brain, but you were talking and I was like, oh, remember. And I forgot. But I just think the idea that all we really need to focus on is what can be easily recorded, essentially, what we can measure, and call that learning and education. It puts children and their teachers in a deficit model from the very beginning. Like if all we're looking at is what they need eventually when they're 5, 6, 7, then we aren't going to look at who they really are right now. We aren't going to look at what's appropriate for the age they are at. Even the children who function well in our systems, function well in quotes, are still, missing something that they're going to need when they go on to school. And I think that's dehumanizing for child and adult to go through our days. For a child to be seen as only what they can't do yet, and for an adult to be expected to focus only on meeting checklist requirements and juggling all of those demands, instead of being able to just be in relationship with the children that you're part of, whose lives you're part of every day, and understanding how, what kind of learning is important for them at those ages, and how that really happens, and how it supports the goals that we're looking at in the future.
Yes, exactly. I think it really just comes back, if I can borrow a Reggio phrase, right? The image of the child. I think so much of it is just so very lacking. From early on, from marketing, right? My God, does it sell to tell parents that your child won't learn anything unless you're constantly engaging them and pulling up the videos and the stimulating brain music. And
I think we really saw that in the beginning of the pandemic, when so many parents were working from home and at home with their children for more hours during the week, and feeling stressed because they felt like they needed to now take on this other role of being educational every moment for the child who's home with me now and doing all of my work. And, I saw a couple who realized over time that it was okay if their kids just played. And I'm not a bad parent for letting them just play. And then started to even see the value of just playing. And it was, so I had a few families that I kind of watched that progression over Facebook in the early days of COVID. And it was really refreshing and hopeful.
But even looking at what they're providing to play with, right? Because you can look at the, kindergarten classroom, right? Oh, there are tons of toys with specific, right, like the self-correcting puzzles, which certainly have value in their place, but that's what you've got.
Yeah.
Right? Is it play?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not saying that your friends, obviously different situation, but
oh, maybe not.
Find play and
yeah. Again, we all have this image in our mind of what learning should look like. And for most of it, it comes from our middle elementary school experience is typically what we remember. And so that looks like for most of us sitting in a group, mostly listening, doing your work when it's assigned, and meeting, whatever the teacher's expectations were for that. And there was an article that was published in NACCE's Young Children probably more than 20 years ago now. So probably some folks would dismiss it, where they had done like a mini research project and found that even adults who, I wish I could remember the name now that I'm putting this all out there, but even adults who had had good training in developmentally appropriate practice for young children and in child development would, if they weren't very intentional, revert back to their own school memories when they were actually in practice in an early childhood classroom, and that it took a lot of effort to work against that. And that's sort of how we got this culture that we have in childcare programs, where we feel like it has to look like school.
So interesting. I guess you're right, because you don't have that working mental model of your own infancy and toddlerhood.
Usually, yeah. Yeah. So I guess that could be another episode, but like I said, it's more than 20 years old. So I don't know that anyone's out actively researching that anymore. Going through my mental index, see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. I feel like as I'm speaking, I know when I go back and listen to it, maybe I'll feel a little bit better about it, but I feel like I'm just really piling on elementary school teachers, and I don't want it to come across that way. I really do want to acknowledge that, it's a bigger systemic problem, and they're doing their very best within that system. And I just don't want to see it come down into my ages. But it's not that, there's just horrible, evil teachers in all of our elementary schools. That's not what we're saying at all.
Right. No, it's exactly like you said, systemic deficits. And in teacher education, if you teach kindergarten or first grade, you need to seek out early childhood resources.
Yes.
As opposed to that being just par for the course, because you teach young children.
Yeah. And if you're an administrator in a school that's about to bring in 3 and 4 year olds, you need to figure out some early childhood education. You need to expose yourself and seek out information about how that age and that learning, I guess I'll say, is different from maybe what you've been seeing in your elementary school.
How you can push it up instead of down.
Yes. Yeah. There are good things that could go up. We need that academic push up. Maybe that's Carol too. Maybe she talks about that too.
Oh, maybe.
No, she said a lot of great things this year. I keep finding all these screenshots of her memes and quote poster things on Facebook that I've saved so that I remember to use them with students or whatever. And, she just really has taken over my year. And a lot of others, I hope, too. Okay, what do you have any other thoughts about making children miserable?
I guess I'm so stuck on the relationship aspect. Like that's my last trip up here, right? It's classroom policies aren't inherently anti-relationship with children, right? And having boundaries and rules for your classroom is not inherently anti-relationship.
Yeah.
But the way so many of our systems are set up now from early childhood up are so inflexible because we as adults cannot handle nuance.
Yeah.
And I think that things we do supposedly in service of those kindergarten and first grade teachers deprive children of the opportunity to think critically and deprive us of the opportunity to hear children's critical thought. Right? If the rule is, next year you're going to have to eat your lunch in 20 minutes, so we're setting a timer and you're eating your lunch in 20 minutes. I've known plenty of 4 and 5-year-olds who could say, okay, I have like 6 things here.
Yeah.
If you'd like me to not choke.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does 20 minutes mean?
That too. Yeah. Well, no, that's where you get the visual timer with the big red thing that gets smaller as the things go.
Yeah.
Developmentally accurate.
But but then we also need to be like, okay, so why are they only getting 20 minutes when they go to kindergarten?
Right. Exactly.
That's the piece that's missing too, is why are those expectations there that we're stressing out so much about years before they're going to be there?
Right. There is value in a continuous system from birth through university.
Yeah.
It's just, we need to look for what actually serves us and them.
Yeah. Well, and back to your relationship piece, point, word, whatever, when you just said relationship, I want to go back to that. I think so we just did an episode with Carol Garbode-Murray about an article she has written about professional love and how caring about children for some is an indication that you are not professional, and that we have to have this total detachment to be seen as professional. And I think elementary school teachers have that expectation too, which is not they do, on them. That expectation is put on them to just move through what you need to move through and be sort of clinical rather than focusing on relationships. And their group sizes make it really hard to focus on relationships. So that's a piece that could be pushed up from good early childhood programs, with some tweaking, I guess, for their real barriers like class size and whoever's putting that expectation on them, whether it's an administrator or a family or a professional organization that they're part of, saying that we shouldn't get attached to students, and just using students instead of children when we're talking about the kids we work with, I think can be a push away from relationship building. That's a whole other thing. Students is one of my words that I think we should stop using in early childhood.
Do you not call the people you work with coworkers?
I don't know. Probably, but I think that's different. Student is inherently language of school.
It is. No, I think in early childhood.
In early childhood, I don't think we need to adopt the language of school to feel like teachers and to professionalize ourselves.
I think you're right. And I don't think this word exists. This word might exist. I don't think it's wrong to describe a relationship in whatever context it exists in.
Well, like I said, we'll have to have a whole other conversation about this, because I know that there are a lot of people who don't see it the way I see it. But for me, that's just one of the things that
I agree. And I don't call them students, but I do think there's some necessity.
But like, I hate calling the instructors who work for me at Ivy Tech my adjuncts. I want to be more human than that. I want to talk about the other instructors or, their personal names instead of my adjunct this, my adjunct that. So maybe it's just a me thing, but.
No, that's fully valid. I mean, certainly if you're talking about an individual child, you would say, Jennifer, not
listen, student. Maybe, I don't know. So anyway, that was a meander.
We started with permission to meander, right?
Yeah, I think yes. Maybe I'm running out of words. Maybe I need to be done recording.
That's fair.
When we had family here for Christmas, we were playing this game called Ransom Notes that I just got and fell in love with. And it's essentially magnetic poetry, and you each get a little magnetic tray, and you get to choose, a bunch of words. And then there's a card that's a prompt, and you have to try and respond to the prompt with just your magnetic poetry letters. And it's so fun. But I had to have people read me the prompt over and over while I was trying to put my response together, because I just couldn't function. And it's sort of how I'm feeling now. So this is the greatest end of a podcast episode ever.
Well, Heather, when you get to work, you're going to need to put those words together.
That's right.
So kind of keep drilling it.
When I go back to work, I'm going to have to be able to talk gooder. Well, we'll see how that goes. But thank you, Liz. This was good. It brought up a lot of things that I want to keep thinking about. And I hope that's true for the other folks who are listening. And we can duke it out about students later. And then we'll do like a poll and see who agrees with us. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. We'll see you again next time.
Bye.
Bye.